Hello, we're Lilith and Lara here with Coffee, Cakes, and Castles, where we will be covering the 20,000 to 25,000 castles of Germany. We'll be talking about historical facts, myths, legends, and drama.
And today we're diving into some fascinating history involving not one, not two, but three castles. Listen along to hear some historical facts, a ghost story, and a family dynasty that lives on to this day. This is Hohenzollern Castle.
Hello, I'm Lilith from America.
And I'm Lara from Germany. And we're just two girls who happen to love all things involving coffee, cakes, and castles, especially when you can have coffee and cake inside a castle. And today we're diving into family legacy and ghostly legends. We're moving to Hohenzollern Castle in the Baden-Württemberg region. And let's dive into things to know. Hohenzollern Castle rises above Baden-Württemberg in Germany, sitting atop Mount Hohenzollern in the Swabian Jura range. And it's standing at an elevation of 855 meters, which is 2,805 feet. It lies about 50 kilometers south of Stuttgart, which is 31 miles, close to the town of Hechingen. And according to the website, there is ample parking and then a 25-minute walk to the castle. And the castle can also be reached from the parking lot by the shuttle bus. And if you come by public transport, there's a train to the Hechingen station and then a bus transfer that will take you to the Hohenzollern parking lot. And from there you can walk. You can check online and in person if tickets are still available, but there's still like a small discount when you book your tickets online. And as always, check the website for the most up-to-date ticket prices. We don't want to say something which is not true tomorrow. So just check the prices online and also check online for special events. It looks like they have some really interesting ones.
And Lara, do you know any interesting things about the area that Hohenzollerns in?
Well, it's quite interesting for the people who know me because I've been working in the Stuttgart area for quite some time, 2 years. The company I worked for had their headquarters over there, and that's why I've been in that region. And I can say it's really beautiful. If you're not in Stuttgart in the central area, because I don't really like Stuttgart, but the surroundings are really pretty. Lots of forests and lots of walking. You can bike there quite well. You can have really good wine. I did some wine tours, and they are really great. So that is like the Stuttgart region is known for, and yeah. It's really nice. You can do many hikes and walks and spend some good time there.
And Hohenzollern looks amazing. And so if I do get to make it back sometime soon, I would love to go to that region and have some wine and go hiking and see this castle in person. That would be so much fun.
We should definitely do that.
Yes.
And they have quite nice castles around there. I've been to a few, but not Hohenzollern yet. I really want to go to Hohenzollern, but maybe because we checked some prices online for flights, maybe Lily's coming over and then we can check out Hohenzollern.
Yes, and we'll talk about it later in this episode, but there's another reason that I want to go here to this particular castle. So we'll get into it. On the tour of the castle, you will see the family tree of the Hohenzollerns, the treasury room, the cathedral, the flag tower, and the Eagle Gate. The Eagle Gate is the main portal into the castle, and it displays a crowned Prussian eagle and the family motto. The family motto is Nihil sine Deo, or nothing without God, which is in reference to divine guidance and royal lineage.
Also interesting fact about Hohenzollern Castle, along with Neuschwanstein and other castles outside of Germany, it influenced the Walt Disney World Castle. So we talked about Neuschwanstein influencing Disneyland, but I feel like this says a lot about how remarkable the castles of Germany are. So that one is quite known as well and is quite high in the ranking from castles which are known in Germany.
Yes. And before we dive into the history, a quick aside about terminology, because we've been talking a lot about the differences between fortresses, castles, and palaces. And it's still worth going over because we have fortresses, castles, palaces, and then Schloss and Burg in German. And sometimes the distinction isn't always clear, at least for us, because
Mhm.
as we've said, we're just two girls who love this stuff and we're still learning. And when we're looking at these structures, Hohenzollern is called a burg because in the Middle Ages, it functioned as one. It was a heavily fortified defensive structure built for military protection and territorial control while being the residence of the Hohenzollerns. And even though the version that we see today was rebuilt in the 19th century in a romantic medieval inspired style, and it kind of looks like a slosh or a palace, because Laura, you had asked, like, why is Hohenzollern considered a burg? Like, it looks,
Yes.
yes. And so a Schloss is a palace or a residence that was built specifically for comfort, ceremony, and aesthetics rather than defense. And Hohenzollern, as we'll get into, when it was originally built, it was built for defense as well as a residence. And that's the distinction. I feel like it looks more similar to something like Neuschwanstein. It was originally built as a fortified castle. And so to help better understand the differences, because as I just said, Hohenzollern is like, it's beautiful. And so talking about Neuschwanstein, which looks like the ultimate fairy tale castle, and that is considered a Schloss because despite the fact that it does have towers and it's on the dramatic cliffside setting, it was never designed for actual warfare and it does not have defensive purposes. And King Ludwig II, as we talked about in the Neuschwanstein episode, built it in the late 19th century as a romantic fantasy palace, which was inspired by the medieval imagery in Wagnerian operas. Hohenzollern is considered a burg because it began as a real medieval castle built to withstand sieges, and it did withstand sieges, which we'll talk about.
Yes, and that's my point to get into some history. Let's
Yes.
dive into it. As we said, we'll be talking about 3 castles that all have stood in the same spot. The castle that you see today was built in 1850 by King Friedrich Wilhelm the
Fourth.
Fourth. But we'll get to that a little later. The name Solar most likely comes from Latin, Mons Solarius, meaning mountain of the sun. And the area was originally occupied by Romans until the 3rd century, and it's possible that they used the mountain as a place of worship. Solarius eventually became Solorien, then Solre, until it became Zollern. Counts would then add Hohen in the 14th century, becoming the Counts of Hohenzollern.
And as a quick aside about the Romans occupying the area, the Romans had occupied Württemberg since the 1st century AD, and they were driven out by the Alemanni in the 3rd century.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And the first castle that stood in this point was likely built in the 11th century, with the first written mention being in 1267. However, the Hohenzollern family, which is still very much alive and involved to this day, likely dates back to the 11th century, which is so long.
Yes.
Like, if
Yes.
you imagine, they are quite, like, they are now active and they've
Mm-hmm.
been for such a long time. We've talked a lot about castles changing hands through the ages and being rebuilt by different families, but this one has remained in the Hohenzollern family, or at least the Swabian branch of the Hohenzollern family, since it originally got constructed.
Yes, which we've so far all the ones that we've talked about have changed hands, and
Yeah,
there are definitely other castles which have remained in the same family, but it was really interesting reading about this one and how the Hohenzollerns are still the ones who own it and still reside there. And that's how it's
crazy.
been since the Middle Ages. Yes, it is crazy to think about. Though not a lot is known about the first castle, it was likely built around 1040 AD and said to be a sight to behold. And more importantly, it had a good vantage point. And if you remember from our episode about Rotenburg ob der Tauber, we talked about free cities of Germany, and they're about to become relevant again here. So if you don't remember, free imperial cities of Germany answered directly to the Holy Roman Empire, and in 1423, several free cities banded together to attack Hohenzollern.
Yeah. And the short story about it, this conflict was between Hohenzollern and Württemberg. The Swabian imperial cities felt antagonized by the burggraf or governor of the castles, Friedrich the Hohenzollern, known as Oettinger, due to his unruly behavior. And the Countess Henriette of Württemberg led the Swabian League of Cities to march on and eventually destroy the fortress, as it's stated on their website. And for the longer story, the Swabian branch of the House of Hohenzollern began to sell their territories and divided the remaining territories as the number of counts grew. This caused the Swabian line of the Hohenzollerns to lose much of their importance. And we already know importance was really important for very many people in the old times. And Friedrich sold off even more territory due to financial difficulties, and the Counts of Hohenzollern wanted to remain independent from Württemberg, and the city of Rottweil, a free imperial city, pronounced a ban over Friedrich's. And this caused him to flee. We then have Friedrich the 12th in conflict with his own brother, Eitel Friedrich I, over Hohenzollern Castle. And at the same time, Friedrich the 12th began a fight against Rottweil. At this time, the Swabian League of Cities allied with his brother, the Eitel Friedrich II, as did the Counts of Württemberg.
And this was not a short conflict. The Swabian League of Cities used siege and starvation tactics in order to claim victory, and this lasted over 10 months. Hohenzollern was positioned on the cone-shaped Zoller Mountain and was praised as the crown of all castles in Swabia and the strongest house in German lands. And the castle was in a good position, and these tactics were the only way they could overcome the steep slope. We know about this conflict. There is a German poem that is 460 verses that is all about the feud between Rottweil or Baden-Württemberg and Count Friedrich Ottinger of Hohenzollern, and you can find a digitized version of the original manuscript online. Unfortunately, I could not find a translation of it, but I do have a summary. So the poem tells the dramatic story of the feud between Count Friedrich the 12th of Hohenzollern, known as Der Ottinger, and the imperial city of Rottweil, a conflict that unfolded in the early 15th century. Written in rhyme German verse, it presents the events from a perspective sympathetic to the Swabian cities, painting Friedrich as a reckless noble whose actions led to his own downfall. And the narrative begins by describing Friedrich's difficult temperament, his financial woes, and his use of violence and intimidation. And according to the poem, he repeatedly harasses merchants and travelers and the citizens of Rottweil, disrupting the imperial peace, earning a reputation as a dangerous lord. The city of Rottweil, tired of his aggression, appeals to the Swabian League of Cities for help, and the poem emphasizes the unity and moral righteousness of the cities, contrasting their discipline and order with Friedrich's impulsive behaviors. When negotiations fail, the cities declare a formal feud, which is a legally recognized conflict under medieval law, which I didn't know that they were like
No, me
formalized
neither.
feuds. Yes. So it was actually formalized. Yeah. And the heart of the poem describes the siege of Hohenzollern Castle. The cities gather their forces, march to the mountain, and surround the fortress. And the poem vividly depicts the tension of the siege, the thunder of the artillery, the smoke rising from the battlements, and the determination of the urban militias. And despite the castle's strong position, Friedrich is outmatched. Supplies dwindle, the morale collapses, and the defenders realize that they can no longer hold out. Eventually, the castle falls to the attackers, who partially destroy it, and Friedrich is forced to flee and ultimately loses much of his power and influence. And as for Ottinger, historical records show that he was captured and imprisoned after Hohenzollern fell, which moves us to the second incarnation of Hohenzollern Castle. So a second and far more formidable Hohenzollern Castle rose on the mountains between 1454 and 1461, which replaced the earlier castle destroyed by the Swabian League. According to many sources, the 15th century reconstruction created a larger, sturdier, and more military stronghold, and it reflected the defensive needs of the late medieval period. For centuries, this rebuilt castle served as a secure refuge for the Catholic Swabian branch of the Hohenzollern family, who frequently relied on its isolated mountaintop during periods of political and religious turmoil. And during the 30 Years' War, the Württemberger troops would capture the castle. This happened about halfway through the war in 1634. And at that time, it fell under the Habsburg control for around a century. It was then occupied by French soldiers during the War of Austrian Succession, and again would return to the control of the Habsburgs in 1798. And by the late 18th century, the military landscape of Europe had changed dramatically. Advances in artillery and shifting political boundaries rendered the hilltop fortress obsolete, and the castle eventually fell to ruin. And by the beginning of the 19th century, only the chapel of St. Michael would remain usable. And so, as we talked about, Hohenzollern was built for the purpose of defense, and it certainly was tested and eventually destroyed. But as Lara is going to talk about, it was rebuilt once again.
Yes, it must have been the place where it's built, because there has to be a castle on top of that mountain. When you look at pictures, it just needs to be there. And here we come to the history of the third and final rebuild of the Hohenzollern Castle, the one that you can still see to this day. The castle was built in 1846, with construction lasting until 1867, which is not that long for a big fat castle. It's just about 20 years, so that's
And
okay.
if you look at pictures, it is big.
It is
it's
big.
another really massive castle, yes.
So it served as a family memorial by King Friedrich Wilhelm IV of Prussia and architect Friedrich August Sterreicher, using Gothic revival architecture. Sculptures around and inside the castle are the work of Gustav Wilkos. Much like Neuschwanstein, Hohenzollern is an example of medieval German Romanticism, though it has less of the fantastical elements which got put into the Neuschwanstein because of Ludwig. So from the writings of Frederick Wilhelm IV of Prussia as king, the memory of the year to me is exceedingly lovely and like a beautiful dream, especially the sunsets we saw from one of the castle bastions. Now is a desire, a dream of my youth, to see Hohenzollern Castle made habitable. And he did just that. While this version of the castle has never been used as a regular or permanent residence, in 1945 it did briefly become the home of former Crown Prince Wilhelm of Germany, son of the last Hohenzollern monarch. So this was Kaiser Wilhelm II. The castle now contains artifacts of Prussian history, including a letter from the US President George Washington, the American history as well, in which he thanks Baron von Sterreicher, a relative of the Hohenzollerns, for his services in the American Revolutionary War.
So we've talked about how connected some of these castles are in Europe in general, because we've had England, we've had all these other countries, and now there is also a connection to America.
Finally.
In the Revolutionary War. Since 1952, the Princess Kira of Prussia Foundation has used the castle for an annual summer camp for children. And we have another castle that's been used in a movie. So in 2015, the thriller horror film A Cure for Wellness filmed some scenes at the castle.
Yes, and we can jump into the architecture of Hohenzollern, because that's quite interesting. The Hohenzollern Castle, as it stands today, is a 19th century Gothic revival reconstruction built between 1846 and 1867 under King Frederick Wilhelm IV of Prussia, as I said. And the architect, Friedrich August Stüler, designed the castle in a highly romanticized medieval style, drawing inspiration from English Gothic revival, French fortresses, and the idealized imagery of the Middle Ages. And the castle is classified as Gothic Revival, Neugotik in German, a 19th century movement that reinterpreted medieval forms rather than replicating them authentically. And design emphasizes dramatic silhouettes, ornamental battlements, pointed arches, and tower groupings meant to evoke medieval grandeur rather than serve defensive purposes. So it got remodeled to be a castle. Also built on the site of earlier medieval fortresses, the current structure is not medieval. It is a romantic reinterpretation of what a medieval burg should look like. As we talked about earlier, the castle sits atop Mount Hohenzollern at an elevation of 855 meters, 2,805 feet, giving it a commanding view of the Swabian Alps, which, by the way, are really pretty. So that is a point why you should go to the Stuttgart region, because of the Swabian Alps. The layout follows the classic hilltop fortress plan with concentric defensive rings, courtyards, and elevated vantage points. And for the exterior features, we have massive curtain walls encircle the upper castle, punctuated by watchtowers, turrets, and bastions. And the Eagle Gate, Adlertor, serves as the ceremonial entrance, followed by a dramatic zigzag ramp leading upward, an intentional theatrical approach route, which, those dramatic stairs always look like. So quite nice. And the towers vary in height and shape, creating the iconic fairy tale skyline, often photographed from below. The castle stonework use warm golden brown sandstone, typical for the region. And while the exterior is heavily fortified in appearance, the interior is palatial, reflecting 19th century royal tastes. And we have some rooms which we're gonna dive into. We have the Count's Hall, Grafensaal, the grand ceremonial hall inspired by medieval knights' halls, features ribbed vaulting, stained glass windows, and ornate woodwork. Then we have the Blue Salon, der Blaue Salon, a richly decorated reception room in neo-Renaissance style. Then we have the King's Bedroom, which is designed in a romantic medieval style but equipped with 19th century comfort. And we have the chapel, a neo-Gothic chapel with pointed arches, stained glass, and carved stone detailing. And these rooms reflect a blend of Gothic revival, as we said, the Renaissance revival, and romantic historicism, typically of the 19th century royal architecture. Although the castle looks like a fortress, its defensive features are aesthetic. Battlements are decorative, so not used anymore, and the castle was never intended to withstand sieges or house a garrison. This castle is a 19th century romantic reconstruction and not a true medieval fortress. We have royal symbolic architecture as well. The castle houses Prussian royal artifacts, including the Prussian royal crown displayed in the treasury. We have heraldic symbols of the House of Hohenzollern appear throughout the architecture, coats of arms, eagles, and dynastic motifs. And the design intentionally reinforces the Hohenzollern family's identity and historical legacy. I can definitely understand why they did that, because Hohenzollern is just because of them there. So, yeah. In the rebuilding, we have a return to medieval German romanticism, which is really nice. And it was built as such to celebrate the dynasty's medieval origins, and it was meant to be visually impressive rather than military useful.
Yes. And that's so interesting because they built this castle, like they still incorporated kind of that medieval German romanticism. And again, like we have not been there, so we don't have pictures, but if you Google it, like this castle really it's beautiful. And I like that they still incorporated kind of its origins and those medieval features that obviously are no longer used. Like nobody's sieging this castle. But it's really nice that they kind of like incorporated that so you can see kind of like what it would have looked like originally, while making it into this really impressive, beautiful castle. And we are now going to talk about the House of Hohenzollern because it's amazing that this castle has been in their family since the first castle was built in the 13th century. The Hohenzollerns stand as one of Europe's most enduring dynasties, with its roots reaching back nearly a millennium, originating in the Swabian Hills around the town of Hechingen. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, Hechingen.
Hesch- Hechingen. The family took its name from the imposing Hohenzollern Castle. The earliest known ancestor, Burkhard the First of Zollern, was recorded by the medieval chronicler Berthold of Reichenau, and by 1111, Emperor Henry V elevated the Zollerns to the rank of Graf or Count, securing their place among the nobility. Loyal vassals of the Swabian Hohenstaufen dynasty, they soon branched into two distinct lines: the Catholic Swabian branch, which ruled small principalities such as Hohenzollern-Hechingen and Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen,
Sigmaringen, yeah.
and the Protestant Franconian branch, which rose to prominence as burgraves of Nuremberg. And you'll hear more about this family when we reach Nuremberg. There's another impressive castle there. And from there, the Franconian line expanded its influence, acquiring Brandenburg in 1415 and Prussia in 1525, eventually establishing the Kingdom of Prussia in 1701. And this branch would lead the drive toward German unification, culminating in the proclamation of the German Empire in 1871 under Kaiser Wilhelm I, with Wilhelm II later serving as its final emperor until his abdication in 1918. Meanwhile, the Swabian branch extended its reach beyond Germany, with the Hohenzollern-Sigmaringen line ascending the Romanian throne in 1866, ruling until King Michael I's abdication in 1947. So from Burkhard I's modest beginnings to emperors, kings, and princes across Germany and Romania, the Hohenzollerns became a dynasty whose branches shaped the political and cultural landscape of Europe for centuries. So again, we have a family that extended out past Germany, and just very impressive how it changed like some of the political landscape. And then the Hohenzollern Castle is still privately owned by them, which already sets it apart from many of Germany's major castles that eventually passed into the state's hands. And ownership is shared between the two surviving branches of the Hohenzollern dynasty, the Prussian branch and the Swabian branch. And the Prussian line is represented today by Georg Friedrich, Prince of Prussia, the current head of House of Hohenzollern, and a direct descendant of the kings of Prussia and German emperors. And the Swabian line is represented by Karl Friedrich, Prince of Hohenzollern, whose family maintained control of southern German territories historically associated with the dynasty, and together these branches jointly managed the castle through a family foundation overseeing its preservation, tourism operations, and cultural programming. And despite it being a major tourist destination, Hohenzollern ultimately remains a family property, and members of the Hohenzollern dynasty still use it for private events. It is so cool. Commemorations and occasional gatherings, and the continuity of this ownership from the medieval counts who built the first fortress or castle on the mountain to modern princes who maintain it today. It makes Hohenzollern one of the few castles in Germany that has remained in the same family for nearly 1,000 years. Like, how crazy is that?
Cool. And this episode wouldn't be complete without some mystery, because we love mystery and drama. And
Yes,
here
do.
we have the tragic tale of the White Lady of Hohenzollern, and it goes as follows. In the 14th century, Kunigunde von Orlamünde fell in love with a member of the Hohenzollern family, but was told he could not marry her as long as 4 eyes stood between them. Misunderstanding the phrase meant to refer to his disapproving parents, Kunigunde supposedly believed it meant her 2 young children. The legend claims she killed them to remove the obstacle, only to discover the truth too late. Overcome with grief, she entered a convent and died in repentance. And historians agree this history is entirely fictional, but it became so widespread that Kunigunde was remembered as a restless spirit wandering Hohenzollern lands. A little bit like the Braunschweiger Lion. This tragic tale fed into the widely known story of the White Lady, a silent apparition in a pale gown said to appear before misfortune in the Hohenzollern Dynasty. Reported sightings stretch across centuries. She was said to have appeared before the death of Margravine Elisabeth of Brandenburg in 1518, before the death of Elector Joachim II in 1571, and again before the death of Frederick Wilhelm I of Prussia in 1740. Another famous account places her at Schönhausen Palace in 1797, shortly before the death of Queen Frederica Luisa, and she was reportedly seen again in 1806 before the death of Prince Louis Ferdinand, who fell in battle against Napoleon. Even during the 19th century, reconstruction of Hohenzollern Castle workers claimed to glimpse a pale woman drifting along the unfinished walls. Whether these sightings were superstition, political storytelling, or genuine belief, the White Lady remains one of the most enduring dynastic omens in German folklore.
Which I'm honestly surprised that we haven't encountered more ghost stories yet.
Yes, that's true.
Yes, but we will when we come to Berg Eltz has another big ghost story that goes along with it. But honestly, like with how old these structures are, I'm surprised that there have not been more. And just another interesting fact about Hohenzollern. In 1970, Hohenzollern Castle was damaged by an earthquake and subsequently underwent renovations.
So, to the recap, we had the first castle from the 11th century to 1423. The earliest Hohenzollern castle was likely built in the 11th century, with the first written mention appearing in 1267. Medieval chroniclers described it as an exceptionally strong fortress, calling it the crown of all castles in Swabia and the strongest house in German lands. The first castle served as the ancestral seat of the Swabian branch of the Hohenzollern family. In 1423, during a conflict with the Swabian League of Cities, the fortress was completely destroyed after a long siege. Nothing of the original structure survived. A second larger castle was constructed between 1454 and 1461 on the ruins of the first. And this version was a late medieval fortress, more expansive and fortified than its predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
It served as a refuge for the Catholic Hohenzollern during the 30 Years' War. And over the time, the family no longer used it as residence, and by the 18th century, the second castle had fallen into significant disrepair. By the early 1800s, it was essentially a romantic ruin visited by poets, travelers, and early tourists. And the third castle from 1850 to the present time. The castle still standing today is the third Hohenzollern Castle, built between 1850 and 1867 under King Frederick Wilhelm IV of Prussia, as we said. The design by Friedrich August Stüler, and it's a 19th century Gothic revival reconstruction inspired by medieval architecture. And this version was built as a romantic monument to the Hohenzollern Dynasty rather than a functional fortress, as we told you. And it incorporates elements such as the Eagle Gate, the Count's Hall, the chapels, and the treasury, which houses artifacts including the Prussian royal crown. And the castle remains privately owned by the Hohenzollern family today.
Yes. And I realized that we've been saying fortress kind of in reference to that first castle that was built and forgot to mention it in this episode. We've talked about it before. A castle can also function as a fortress if it is well fortified, which Hohenzollern was. And of course, the most important question, can you have coffee and cake at Hohenzollern? And this is why I really want to go here. The answer is yes and yes. So there's Café Cura on the second floor, which invites visitors to enjoy coffee and cake on a donation basis. And the donations go to the Friends of Hohenzollern Castle and the Cura Foundation. And then they also have nice a nice coffee menu at their castle restaurant. I looked it over. It sounds so good. And they have a selection of desserts where they have different kinds of strudels with ice cream. And there is also a beer garden for more casual dining that can be found in the courtyard. And really looking at their castle restaurant menu, I want to visit just so I can eat here. After getting cake at their cafe, of course, because the menu sounds ridiculously amazing. I would just like love to go. It sounds
Yes,
so
let's
good.
do it. It's a
Yes,
plan.
it's a plan. We need to do this. This is one that we have to go to when I
Nice.
come back. And you do have to have tickets to the castle to access any of the cafes and restaurants as they are on castle grounds and inside the castle.
We
And
would
then
want to visit the castle as well, so that's
yes, of
okay.
course. Like we have to do the castle tour. And then you can make reservations for the restaurants per their website. And of course, like the menu is probably going to change. So also check on that as well. But yes, there is coffee and cake at this castle.
Amazing. For listening.
Thank
It was
you.
such a nice
Yes.
episode, and thank you for telling me all about Hohenzollern Castle. I'm really excited to get coffee and cake over there.
Me too. Thank you guys. Bye.
Bye.